So he didn't mislead him at all. Gough misled himself.
But some people predicted the dismissal, including the newspaper proprietor Rupert Murdoch.
I had lunch with him and with Ken Cowley, and told me, Rupert Murdoch did, that in effect there'd be, the government would be dismissed, there would be an election to the House of Representatives, and in a friendly sort of way said, well, John, don't worry, you'll be appointed as ambassador to Tokyo, which turned out to be, he was right on both counts.
It is a conversation which Murdoch denies. Sir John Kerr was so worried during the crisis that his office contacted Buckingham Palace to find out the exact procedures for a Governor-General's removal by the Prime Minister. Whether Whitlam would have been prepared to have sacked Kerr is the conundrum of the crisis.
Do you think that Mr Whitlam would have been prepared to move against Sir John Kerr?
Yes, I have no doubt whatsoever.
The political consequences of Whitlam sacking the Governor-General would have been so horrendous that I don't believe that it would have been contemplated. And it certainly had not been contemplated up to that stage.
You wouldn't have moved against the Governor-General?
No. I think I would have had enough sense to realise that if I had removed the Governor-General surreptitiously, I'd be as popular and respected as Kerr became for removing me surreptitiously.
Having decided to sack Whitlam, Kerr wanted the support of the Chief Justice of the High Court, Sir Garfield Barwick. Barwick was expecting to be asked. As early as the 20th of September, Kerr had told Barwick that he might need his opinion.
I heard no more of him until the 9th of November, on a Sunday evening, when he rang and asked me would I see him the next morning on my way to court. I did, and then he asked me the question, in substance, not in terms, was he bound to keep a Prime Minister who couldn't obtain supply? And that's a question that's not difficult really to answer. And that's the only question, in one sense, which I answered. That question, I thought, no court could decide.
Barwick was an icon to him. He still is to any of the survivors of that generation. And it could have got back to Kerr, it probably did, that Barwick, who despised everybody, had said of him, oh, Jack Kerr, his generation referred to him as Jack before he became John, Jack Kerr ought to sack Whitlam, but he'll never have the guts. Now, Kerr was a bit short of guts too. He would have consulted Barwick for reinforcement, for approval.
He was greatly strengthened by knowing that this eminent constitutional authority, Sir Garfield Barwick, said, yes, you have not merely the power, but you have the duty to exercise the reserve powers.
Very good morning to you. Bill Dowsett with AM for Tuesday, the 11th of November, and what a day of anniversaries today is. It's Remembrance Day. It's also the 10th anniversary of UDI. It's the day a new African nation comes into being, and the day on which there could be some end to our own constitutional deadlock.
November the 11th would be a busy day for Sir John Kerr. He had to remember the fallen and conduct an execution. Whitlam now proceeded with his plan to call a Senate election. He rang the Governor-General at mid-morning to make a lunchtime appointment to tender this advice. Unbeknown to Whitlam, Kerr had the dismissal documents ready. The Governor-General now rang Fraser. The contents of this discussion have been disputed between Fraser and Kerr. According to Fraser's version, it is clear he was alerted to Whitlam's dismissal as a possibility.
The Governor-General rang and asked 4 questions which he emphasised were hypothetical questions, but it had got to the stage where he felt that he needed to know what my response would be. And the questions were, if I did become Prime Minister, if I was commissioned to form a government, would I recommend an election? Would I get supply through? Would I refrain from any witch hunts against the previous government? And would I regard the government as a caretaker government, making no important decisions until after an election had been, a full election had been held? And I had no problem in saying yes to those 4 questions.
His memory is at fault there. He probably would have guessed in a pretty convinced way that that was bound to happen, because he knew the dilemma, he knew the reserve powers, and he knew they were the only way out. So you can say that he probably strongly suspected that that was going to happen, but he had no preliminary warning at all. The last time that John saw Fraser was on the 6th of November.
As Whitlam drove to Yarralumla to secure his Senate election, the Labor Party was euphoric. It believed that victory was near. Whitlam never saw the ambush. But in a mix-up, Fraser arrived at Government House before the Prime Minister.
What would you have done if, in fact, you had known that Fraser was already at Government House?
I would have driven back to Parliament House.
You wouldn't have proceeded to go into the building?
No, of course not.
You would have smelt a rat?
Clearly. Or 2. I went to the Kerr study and sat down, as he indicated, and then I said to him, I have the advice in writing, which I told you I would be giving to you. And he said, well, before you come to that, I've got a letter for you, and I'm terminating your commission.
Now, I want to put to you the Governor-General's version of this discussion, because he says that you then indicated that you wanted to contact the palace.
No truth in that at all. When, how was I to contact the palace? Of course I wasn't. It's an utter fabrication by him.
Well, then I was summoned into the Governor-General's office. He told me that he had dismissed Mr. Whitlam because he'd not been able to get the budget through and had not recommended an election. And then I was commissioned as Prime Minister. And the Governor-General said, well, I expect, Prime Minister, you have some work to do back at Parliament House.
Whitlam had 2 responses to his dismissal: shock and acceptance. He retreated not to Parliament House to rally his forces, but to his home at the Lodge.
Well, I mean, imagine if, just put Keating in Whitlam's place. If Keating was on the receiving end of that sort of treatment, that wouldn't have been the end of it. He'd have torn the place down. We'd almost have had a revolution. They'd have had to call out the troops. But Gough, there was nothing of that. Gough was a constitutionalist and a traditionalist, and it didn't occur to him to do anything but accept Kerr's verdict.
Whitlam later joked that at the Lodge he ate his meal after the execution.
We drove over to the Lodge. I saw Gough sitting in the little extension of the dining room, a sort of a gazebo affair, sitting alone. I gave a V for victory sign, because that was our feeling, how well things were going.
Mr. Whitlam was sitting down having lunch, and his exclamation was to me, "The bastard's done a game on me."
We sat there like stunned mullets.
Meanwhile, Fraser had returned to Parliament House with one objective: to secure supply so that he could advise an election. Whitlam had not even told his Senate leadership of the dismissal.
And I went off to over to see Malcolm before the House met. And as I was walking across King's Hall, Doug McClelland came up. Doug was then manager of government business in the Senate. Look, he said, I don't want to ambush you straight after lunch, but as soon as the Senate meets at 2 o'clock, I think was the time, Ken Reed's going to move the gag and really put the hammer on you fellas to pass or reject these bills. I said, all right, thanks. And that was the conversation. He went off. I went into Malcolm's room, and of course everybody's still full of excitement.
And I said to Reg Withers, Reg, how long will it take to get supply through?
And I said, oh, pretty quick. He said, how? Somebody said, how? And I said, that's my secret. Because I wasn't going to tell anyone what Doug had told me.
I went in there. I said to Reg Withers, who was the leader of the opposition in the Senate, with whom I got on very well, I said, look, Reg, we've got to get these bills through. Stop this mucking around, or worse to that effect.
I said, we're going to agree to it. And Ken looked at me and he said, you know, he said, you're a funny bloke. He said, I've been telling Gough you'd never buckle. And I said, oh, had to, Ken. He said, you had to? I said, yeah. I said, Gough's been sacked, Malcolm's Prime Minister, we want the legislation. Oh, he said, you joke about everything to the last.
Reg is a sort of bloke who would always be skylarking a bit, and you wouldn't really know whether he was serious or not. And the only inkling that I got that something was not right was the fact that one of my colleagues called me over to the door of the chamber. This would have been about 10, 12 past 2, and said, there's some rumour going around the government's been sacked. Which I said, well, really? Tell me another one. And I took no significance of it. Went back into the chamber, and of course the bills then were put through in 2 or 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this afternoon the Governor-General commissioned me to form a government until elections can be held.
The 1975 supply crisis was now over. Kerr's solution had prevailed. Fraser, the caretaker Prime Minister, could now advise Kerr to call a general election.
I'd suggest that honourable members on my right remain silent if they want to stay in the House.
Whitlam, now opposition leader, despite having secured a vote of no confidence in Fraser in the House of Representatives, had to fight the election he never wanted. In fact, however, it had been a close-run thing.
How much longer would the Senate have held after lunchtime on the 11th of November?
How long is a piece of string? I don't know. I really don't know. Whether that lasted another week, I don't know.
It was a firm decision, and I have no doubt in my mind that within hours we would have crossed the floor and given the government supply.
I believe that if it had gone on in a protracted sense, we would have been prepared to cross the floor.
How many people here want the Liberal Party to govern after December the 13th?
But the Senate held long enough, and Malcolm Fraser felt vindicated by his massive election victory on the 13th of December.
20 years later, have you got regrets?
Regrets in some things, I suppose, but I wouldn't have altered my actions in relation to these matters. There's nothing I would have changed in relation to that.
Am I correct in saying that your real objection to what the Governor-General did was not so much the act of dismissal, but the fact that